Hello and good evening all. This is one of the constituent component videos of the 5 cars that barely got off the ground compilation, posted for data analysis purposes to determine which car will get a deep dive video in the future. For those of you wondering which video performed best out of all the 5 cars that never got off the ground videos, it was, perhaps unsurprisingly, the Ford J car, and I think that for that, I'm actually going to start working on a larger overview of the GT40 and its many variants, as I think the J car requires more context than some of the other vehicles mentioned in that video. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoy. This is admittedly a bit of a weak entry to start off with, as the 961 did actually win a race that it contested, which is more than can be said for any of the other cars that we'll be covering. Nevertheless, the program's ambitions relative to what actually came about is sufficient, in my mind, to qualify it for this video. Coming into the mid-1980s, Porsche had just racked up a series of World Sports Car Championship and Le Mans victories in prototype racing with the 956 and 962 Group C cars. The GT category, intended to stand companion to Group C, was the imaginatively named Group B, a rule set that is these days better known for its contributions to the golden age of rallying, but in reality it was intended for use in sports car racing as well. The motivations for designing a new car to these rules came about from several convergent channels in the early 1980s. Chief among them was the knowledge that the 911, the company's, well, economic everything, pretty much, was approaching its maximum potential as an automobile that was still fundamentally based on the original Beetle. In 1981, when design work on the new car, at the time just called the Gruppe B, commenced, the original replacement for the 911, the excellent and radically different 928, had been on the market for 3 years, and despite being the first and to date only sports car to win European Car of the Year, and having seen moderate sales success, it was appealing to a fundamentally different consumer demographic than the 911. Meanwhile, the drop-off in 911 sales that had occurred in the 1970s and spooked Porsche's management into the 928 program had more or less stabilized, presumably because...
Oh, what with all these gas crises and Watergates, I needed a good laugh.
Or something, I'm reaching a bit with that reference. Be that as it may, the remit for 1981, coming from newly appointed Managing Director Peter Schutz's office, was to build the ultimate 911 to see what the platform was fundamentally capable of, with approval given for a motorsports program in Group B to speed up development. Early on the build punch list was the design and integration of an all-wheel drive system to take advantage of that opening in the rulebook, with much of the other mechanical componentry lifted from the contemporaneous Porsche Group C parts bin, initially, of course, sharing its bits with the 956, which later became the 962, but from an engine and drivetrain perspective didn't change all that much from one to the other. Initial development progressed not exactly at a snail's pace, but in contrast to some of the cars we'll be looking at later in the video, it wouldn't really be considered a crash program either, and the initial Gruppe B prototype was ready in 1983. But of course, Group B was a homologation class, and so production plans were put in motion to turn the car into a production road and race car for sale to the public and to customer racing squads, as, of course, Porsche had been having success with both of those sales paths with their other road cars and with their past and present racing cars for some time. The road-going version of the 961 was, as we all know, the 959, which is arguably much better remembered, and mostly remembered as Porsche's first attempt at a supercar. That being said, they were both mechanically equipped thus. A, surprise of surprises, horizontally opposed 6-cylinder engine, displacing 2.8 liters and equipped with sequential twin turbochargers, all carried over from the 935 and essentially the same engine as had already been implemented in the 956 and 62. In the 959, it produced 444 horsepower and 369 pound-feet of torque, while the 961 ran substantially higher boost pressures and made 680 horsepower as a result. This sent power to all 4 wheels, which actually is a bit of a combo breaker for this channel, through a 6-speed manual gearbox, with the 959 sold with driver-adjustable power bias between front and rear wheels, while the 961 was set up to be rear-wheel drive biased. Likewise, the 959 was fitted with adjustable damper and suspension systems to improve stability and road holding, while the 961 had more racing-focused componentry that could only be adjusted by qualified pit crew. Nevertheless, it was still double wishbone suspension on all four wheels, and Dunlop developed the tires for the car, as they were already working with Porsche on the Group C cars, and, well, why ruin a good thing when you've got one going? The 959 and 961 were built around a lightweight, exotic material chassis and draped in equally exotic bodywork constructed from aluminum and Kevlar with a floor built from Nomex, which, yes, that's the fire-resistant material more commonly found in racing suits than racing cars. In the 961, the bodywork panels were even further reduced to save as much weight as possible, reduced in thickness that is, and thus the 961 weighed in at 1,150 kilos or 2,540 pounds, while the 959, with its radio and comfortable seats and other such effrippant effronteries, kept the needle going another 300 kilograms higher to land at 3,197 pounds, which it sounds like a lot, but you have to bear in mind that we're talking about a car that, when it went on sale, was the fastest road car in the world at a top speed of 198 miles an hour and was capable of 0 to 100 kph or 62 miles an hour in 3.7 seconds, which was effectively unheard of at the time. An additional 235 or so horsepower and the loss of 660 pounds should have made a compelling difference. And top speed for the 961 was reported at 211 miles an hour or 340 kph, although an acceleration time of 0 to 100 was not readily available. The 959 was set for production in mid-late 1985 and was intended to compete in the 1986 World Sports Car Championship season, but two issues had arisen. One, homologation quantities still had to be met, and not only was Porsche subcontracting out the building of the 959 to Carrosserie Bauer, but they were losing the better part of $250,000 US in 1985's money to build each one. Then there were various difficulties in the production itself, and this meant that deliveries wouldn't actually begin until 1987. And issue 4 out of our 2 issues, but perhaps a less critical one, nobody was really participating in Group B in the World Sports Car Championship anyway. So, not great. Porsche then started to pivot the plans for the car to rallying, and after a few test cars with naturally aspirated engines entered, but failed to finish the 1985 Paris-Dakar, as the Paris-Dakar had no homologation requirements, and thus they could be throwing whatever experimental cars they wanted at the problem, 1986 was the year for the true car to assume its competition mantle, despite production not yet really having started, and it started off its competition career with a bang, running 1-2 in class at the Paris-Dakar, won by René Metge and followed by the great Jackie Ickx. At the Le Mans test that year, it was Metge again who put in the fastest time, well ahead of the, I wrote denuded Group B field. It was a sample size of 1. And indeed, the car was faster than a fair few of the Group C vehicles as well, which boded well for the car's prospective performance at Les Arts that June. However, since the production quantities to achieve homologation as a Group B car, which is 200 units, was still hugely distant, the 961 was instead entered as an IMSA GTX vehicle, which had no such restrictions, but was also the sole entrant in category. So you had effectively 2 GT cars and the rest were all Group C1s or C2s. Nevertheless, the 961 started mid-pack at Le Mans, while the BMW M1 that made up the entirety of the Group B field was last on the grid, this its final Le Mans appearance, but the 961's combination of road car-derived robustness and competition-proven mechanicals carried over from the Group C cars proved a compelling mix, with the car working its way up to the top 10 by morning and finally finishing 7th overall, behind 5 proper Group C Porsches and a 936 that was dressed up as a heavily modified Group 6 car, but technically now was grandfathered as a Group C. It was a weird time. Nevertheless, the car was ahead of every Group C2 car and a number of the other C1 cars, including a fair few privateer 956s and 962s. It did, of course, best the M1 by a wide margin, although the M1 did finish Le Mans, and Porsche shipped the car over to the US to run an IMSA event to try out those waters for next year. In IMSA competition, it was reclassified to compete directly with the prototype GTPs, which were, effectively Group C cars, but with slightly different rules and no fuel consumption requirements, and was thus decidedly not optimized for the venue of its first race outing stateside, Daytona, and its tires proved its proverbial weakest link given the track's high speed and the loading caused by the bank turns. So they gave that up as a bad job and shipped it home. They did enter Le Mans again in '87, but the car crashed out, having run just outside the top 10, and with nobody else participating in Group B in sports car racing anymore, Porsche canned the project completely, as its potential as a rally car had been similarly undercut after the FIA killed the class on safety grounds for any non-track applications. The car was repaired after its crash, and now lives nice and snug on display in the Porsche Museum in Stuttgart.